I work in the field of social sculpture and connective practice. Joseph Beuys, the artist who coined the phrase social sculpture, said, "Every human being is an artist, working with the invisible materials of speech, discussion, and thought to reshape the conditions that shape our lives." I work with a network of social sculpture practitioners to involve people, communities, individuals, organizations in mind shift work and developing agendas for transformation. My own social sculpture journey began in apartheid South Africa, tormented by the injustices that my little 5-year-old self could not understand or articulate. The kitchen was the common zone where black and white met, where several different South African mindsets collided with each other. I watched the woman who worked for us cook food for me and my parents, which we then ate on china plates in the dining room. After we finished eating, she and the gardener ate the remainder of the food, but on tin plates in the yard or the kitchen, not in the dining room. When I was 6 or 7, I asked my mother, "Why does Grace eat off a tin plate and we eat off china ones? Why does Grace not call you by your name? Why does she call you ma'am?" She shrugged helplessly and answered, "What can one do? That is just how things are." This was my first encounter with mindsets, but not the last. Whenever I asked why, I got the same helpless response. I remember lying in bed at night, feeling very alone with my questions, and thinking, this can't be just how things are. Why can't we change them? Who said it must be like this? At 10 or 11, I started to ask Grace questions about the situation in the kitchen and in South Africa. She would look down and say, "Don't get sad, don't be angry. What can one do? Your mother is not a bad woman." Sometimes, when my parents were out, Grace called me to come and sit in the yard and eat with her. So, my home consisted of many homes, and I wasn't sure where I was at home. In the kitchen, where all the mindsets collided, in the dining room, in my parents' mindset, or in the yard. Sometimes it even seemed like none of us were really at home. At the same time, my experiences of authority, of class division, of endless inhumane events turned into an equally endless stream of questions about mindsets. But my questions were also my first real sense of agency. As I got older, I shared my questions with others. Many didn't see the questions at all, and some, like my mother, were resigned. Living in the margins between these mindsets, I looked for people who believed in change. I found my way into the resistance movement that included activists, writers, musicians, artists, lawyers, alongside workers, who all wanted to change the world. In the resistance movement, despite lots of discussion, there was, however, little space for reflection on different strategies and dimensions of transformation. The leadership set strategy, partly because of the urgency of things. The discussion that was possible turned into debates that tended to harden existing positions. And then, in the 70s, I encountered many radical thinkers Thinkers on agency, experiential knowing, and internal mobilization. They all emphasized shifts in consciousness as an essential part of the struggle for liberation. They offered insights into the connection between thought, imagination, and action. A particular inspiration was a little book entitled A Basic Call to Consciousness. Drawn up by a great gathering of First Nations people and presented to the UN in 1977, it called, as First Nations people are doing now, for a new kind of consciousness, beyond the extractivist mindset of global capitalism that sees all life forms and the earth as resources. It also made clear that we have a lot of mind shift work to do and that outer transformation needs an inner revolution. In the past 4 decades, much of my work has focused on individuals, communities, and organizations having a direct experience of what it means to use the invisible materials of speech, discussion, and thinking, so that we can work like artists to explore and reshape values, attitudes, and habits of thought. Luckily, we have an inner workspace, a rent-free studio that we carry on our shoulders. It is the space of imagination and transformation. Here, in this space, we have a direct experience of our agency and discover where mind shifts can take place. The first amazing thing about the space that we all have in all cultures and irrespective of whether we have had formal education or not, is that in it we can call forward images and experiences from the past. We call them memories. I can, for example, see images of little Shelley at about 4 years old, looking out at the world with big eyes, standing in the kitchen, seeing the tin plates and the china plates, and remembering the way people didn't look at each other. I can see all this in this space. Try now to recall an image of your own in this theater of memory, a place you loved when you were young, perhaps, or the leaves emerging from the trees in the spring. It might help to see inside the space if you close your eyes. Go there for just a moment. Now you know where this amazing space is, but actually we are using it all the time. When I go to buy tomatoes, for example, I see them in front of me in the present, but actually I see them in this inner space because my eyes are not on the tomatoes and they are not in me. Whilst looking at the tomatoes on the shelf in front of me, I look back into the recent past and see what's in the fridge. But now I also start seeing what I might cook with them. As I imagine this, I can almost smell and taste what I'm going to cook, and I begin to salivate. What is taking place is truly astonishing. I am now looking at something that does not yet exist. I am picturing the future, and it activates an inner experience. I salivate. Although this process is so profound and gives us a sense of our imaginative power, it is also so obvious that we take it completely for granted. And yet, this capacity for seeing past, present, and future can be used for much more than buying tomatoes and meal planning. Just imagine how we could use this capacity for seeing how things have been, how they are now, and for developing images of a humane and eco-social future. But the most astonishing capacity related to the space of imagination is to be able to stand a bit to the side and to see what I see. And the minute I begin to see what I see, I also begin to see how I see. In other words, I can see the lenses with which I see, the attitudes, the values, and habits of thought. And when I see on this level, I begin to see how I think. This is one of the most significant capacities we have, because this in turn enables me to think about what I think. This whole process is one of coming home to oneself, encountering what I think, my prejudgments, prejudices, my concerns, my future scenarios. In a group, in an organization, and in the social movements, it helps each person gather their own impressions and thoughts, look at them, organize them, form them, and share them. And then we can listen to what is emerging from the group as a whole. Just as bees work together to make honey from the individual streams of nectar that they collect, so we have to develop ways to make social honey, to work together to shape new social visions. This is part of the mystery of the relationship between the individual and collective action. I have introduced you to the space of imagination in your chairs in a lecture theatre, so you can get a sense of it. But usually, we use it within connective practices, like Earth Forum, to enable processes of reimagining and developing agendas for transformation. Developed in a South African village in 2002, and later for the Climate Summit in Durban in 2011, Earth Forum is a prototype that we know works, because we have used it with several thousand people, with young change makers in China, with farmers, activists, and school teachers in South Africa, with healthcare professionals, lawyers, planners, educators, and activists in Europe, and in contexts where stakeholders had very different takes on sustainable development. We have also seen the impact, how individual stakeholders find a common vision, how organizations are able to use it to learn to think together, and how communities, organizations, and individuals are able to develop agendas for transformation. But it is still a prototype, because we need to multiply its use. To do meaningful mindshift work in the world, we need to reach millions of people with this and many other practices. And so, we offer training for people to be able to do this through our project called University of the Trees, Lab for New Knowledge and an Eco-Social Future. This is an alternative mobile university that exists wherever people are willing to look at how we see the world, individually and together, to explore alternative mindsets beyond stewardship and dominion. We call processes like this instruments of consciousness. They connect thought and action, thought and life. Before I end, let me focus for a moment on the Anthropocene. This is a term used by scientists to rename our current era. It acknowledges the effects of human behavior on our planetary home. Social sculpture is a response to the Anthropocene. It acknowledges that the human being is a major problem. We are the only creature that does not simply unfold. With our capacity for freedom, we are the Earth's most dangerous creature. But social sculpture also sees the human being as the solution. Alongside developing technical solutions, we therefore also need to focus on the inner culture of the human being. Without this inner dimension of sustainability, we can't develop a viable future. So instead of sidelining human beings with humanoid robots, let us come home to how it is now, to what we have done, and to how it could be. For the first time in history, human beings have consciously to shape a common future on a shared planet. And the struggles of the indigenous people, in many senses, are leading the way. Alongside their challenges to capitalist extractivism is a basic call to consciousness, to reimagine and reconfigure our relationship to the world. In this dire situation, we can either give up on the human being or see the human being at the beginning of its development, a being that does not simply unfold, but needs to develop its potential for empathy, for care at a distance, and for perceiving the bigger picture. Only human beings can develop a new mindset based on interdependence. This is the radical social art of the future, learning how to change our mindset, which is also a change of heart. So, let us redefine home and find solutions here on Earth. This would be a real homecoming, based on perceptions of the planet as one place for all life forms and systems, and for one race, the human race. Thank you.